in the world. What is being done to the river Indus is it's being choked to death by building dams after dams. There are so many dams, I'm sure even the experts won't be able to give you the number. And what is that leading to is complete destruction of a river system. And that has led to literally the extinction of hundreds of marine species. You know, if you talk about the blind dolphin of the river Indus is one of the rarest dolphins in the world, and that is close to extinction because there's no water flowing down. So a very famous, one of the most famous delicacies of Sindh is a fish called pallo. And Abu Rayyan Biruni, who was an explorer in the 11th century from Persia, who in the 11th century had traveled all the world, extending from the Far East to the Middle East to Europe to Northern Africa, wrote that pallo was the most delicious fish he ever ate. Today you cannot find it anywhere because there is no water. And what is that causing is the death of a delta. With death of mangrove forests. Mangrove forests are very rare species of forest which are only found in very few places in the world, and a delta of the river Indus was one of the places, and you cannot, they're all dying. What that is causing then is encroachment of seawater upstream, so the whole lower Sindh, which was the most rich agricultural land, is not cultivable anymore because there's increased salt in the soil. So then that leads to the economic downfall of all the people here who depend on agriculture. So when you increase, I don't want to go into the details, but when you add all these ingredients of religious, ethnic extremism, poverty, death of a culture, death of a language, and I'm sure what you'll have in Sindh very soon will be the next major human catastrophe, a catastrophe that I personally believe is going to be worse than what we've seen in Darfur, it's going to be worse than what we've seen in Somalia, and it's going to be worse than what we've seen in Afghanistan. And that is the reason, not only as Sindhis, majority of us here are Sindhis who were born in Sindh, are people whose ancestors came from Sindh. But even if you're not from Sindh, even if you were not born in Sindh, even if your forefathers not from Sindh, as a member of the human race, I think it is everybody's duty to make sure that we prevent this catastrophe. And that is the reason I would request all of you to get involved and help in any way you can. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Makbul Halepota. Please let me welcome Dr. Marvin Weinbaum next. He is Professor Emeritus of Political Scientist at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, and he is currently Scholar in Residence at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C. He has served as an analyst for Afghanistan and Pakistan with the Bureau of Intelligence and Research at the U.S. Department of State between 1999 and 2003, and also as Director of Programs in South Asia and Middle Eastern Affairs at the University of Illinois. He has authored many articles and books on the region. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Weinbaum.
Well, I'm very pleased to be here. And like Sig Harrison, I chose this evening over iftar at the embassy. You know, it's hard to match the passion and the completeness of the picture which has been drawn by the previous speakers, emphasizing the injustices which have been visited upon people of the Sindh, but not just the people of the Sindh, and not just injustices by Punjabis, but the Punjabis themselves have suffered great injustices. And indeed, that's really what I wanted to emphasize tonight. But before doing so, let me say that an organization like this organization is important. It's important because you're nationalists in the sense, and you're celebrating nationalism. And that's fine. There are elements of nationalism which are not necessarily attractive as well. We've seen how nationalism can also lead to actions which deny other people their rights, which lead to fanaticism. But nationalism is valuable for celebrating certainly the perpetuation of a culture, of language and history. And this is quite good. But at its best, an organization like this can see nationalism as it should be, as a means to an end. Not merely as an abstraction, but as a way of emphasizing that certain peoples are being denied their rights by virtue of who they are, by virtue of their identity. And in a city which is filled with interests, we give them, fortunately, the pejorative of special interests, but that's at the very heart of the American political system. The fact that there is a proliferation of interests and that they have an opportunity to present their case. And long ago, James Madison recognized, as our president, recognized how much more important it was to have this proliferation of groups than it would be than to have just a few chosen few. So I want to wish this organization really the best in its endeavors. We know what interest groups like this institute, this PAC can do, and I know you're in the hands of very capable leadership. I also want to say, though, that having heard all that has been done to people in the Sindh, that we also have to ask, what are the people of the Sindh doing for themselves? And this is important because so much of your influence is so often by the way in which people perceive who you are, what you're all about, what your values are. And when we hear stories in communities of the Sindh where in villages women are denied their rights, where honor killings occur, yes, the central government, the federal government in Pakistan can play a very important part in limiting this kind of behavior. But it's up to the communities themselves and up to the people, really, of the Sindh to say this is unacceptable. You have a wonderful tradition in the Sunni tradition. You've heard about it tonight. And as it's been expressed, it's a tradition which in its essence is not peculiar even to Islam, although it's certainly associated with Islam. But that kind of spiritualism you can find in Judaism, in Christianity, and elsewhere. And it is the mobilizing of those forces of which there has not been sufficiently enough. It's not enough to simply say we have a great tradition. What has the Barelvi tradition, for example, how has it responded to the Deobandi tradition? Has it been sufficient? Or has it at times even inadvertently perhaps allied itself with that most doctrinaire and non-Sufi-like tradition.